Welcome, everyone. My name's Jonathan Singer, and I am a professor at Loyola University Chicago School of Social Work. I'm one of the co-leads for the Grand Challenge Harness Technology for Social Good. And I'm very excited to see everyone here today as we talk about ChatGPT as a teacher's aid. Before I share my slides, I want to let folks know that I'm going to be focusing on my slides and not so much the chat, but I encourage everybody to connect with each other, to chat, to share resources and ideas in the chat. That will provide us with an additional set of resources and ideas that we might be able to move forward with after the webinar. What we're going to do is we're going to record, and then we'll have that available. And then because of the magic of generative AI, we'll be able to do all sorts of things with a transcript, including automatically create X or Twitter threads and blog posts and classroom quizzes and stuff like that. So, and I recognize some of the folks here on the Zoom, and a lot of folks I don't recognize. So, just as an overview, let me start sharing my slides here. I'm going to. Where did my share screen go? Here we go. So this is a webinar for the Grand Challenges. The Grand Challenges is a project of originally the American Academy of Social Work and Social Welfare. Now it's its own organization. And the idea was that social work was going to wrap its mind around a handful of challenges that we could do something to make significant movement on socially over a 10-year period. We're a little bit more than halfway through. We have 13 grand challenges. This is the Harness Technology for Social Good Grand Challenge. And if you want to learn more about the Grand Challenges, you can go to grandchallengesforsocialwork.org. The content that I'm going to share today is going to focus primarily, the examples are going to focus primarily on social work, but I think social science more broadly will apply. So the briefest overview of generative AI. Okay, so generative AI is it's a bunch of computer code that was trained on a bunch of words that enables folks to engage with text and images through natural language, and that the responses are created on the fly using natural language. One of the frames that I found useful, I was listening to the A16Z podcast, and somebody suggested that the dawn of the internet gave us universal access to information, and the dawn of generative AI is giving us universal access to intelligence. Which I think is a really interesting frame, right? So you've got this set of computational tools, you have text-based programs like ChatGPT and Bard that can think through data in a way that traditional Google searches cannot. And you have visual AI, things like Midjourney and DALL-E 3, that can create images from natural language prompts. So when we think about this, this sort of new era that we're in, sort of a third epoch of or epoch of computation, what does it mean for education? So there are many possible futures. I think two possible futures that people oftentimes think about is, on one hand, you have the sort of the teacher as computer, right? That generative AI and all of these tech advances are going to essentially take over the function of the teacher. Like, what is the role of an instructor when not only can people access the information that they need, but they can actually access something that engages intelligently with that information, right? If you're no longer the sage on the stage, if you no longer know more than your students, and that's been true for a long time, they have access to way more information than we do in the moment. And then if they can engage with that intelligently, through generative AI? What's the role of the instructor? The another vision is if you have an instructor that's sitting in front of students who are not thinking through things, that they're relying on generative AI to write their papers, that they're relying on generative AI to come up with ideas, that they're relying on generative AI to do all the sorts of tasks that we currently think of sort of the learnings, the task, the purpose of education, then what's the point? Now, I created both of these images using Midjourney, and we have one of the big issues presented right away. We have white-looking male professors. That's what generative AI came up with, right? And that's a huge issue right there. Um, but what I want to say is that these are two possible futures. What I'm going to present is some ways that we can think about incorporating um, generative AI into teaching, really thinking about it as a teacher's aid. Um, and and I'm going to have time at the end. We're going to have discussion and conversation about this. So um, now, there are a couple of teaching frameworks. There's Bloom's taxonomy, right, which we've all gotten very used to writing our conference abstracts and our goals and objectives using Bloom's taxonomy. Sometimes folks use it to create lessons plans. Oregon State created a revised Bloom's taxonomy, thinking through generative AI, and I'm just going to share that with you briefly. There's a ton of information on their website about it, so I'm not going to go into great detail about it. I'm also going to talk about the SAMR model. Which I first learned about from Nancy Smith and Laurel Hitchcock and Melanie Sage, who wrote a fantastic book called Teaching Social Work with Digital Technology, which I always have on my desk. And the SAMR model stands for substitution, augmentation, modification, redefinition, right? And so you have these four ways of thinking about either enhancing or transforming education. And I think that there's some value in thinking through that with AI. So I'm going to talk about that briefly. Um, so with Bloom's taxonomy revisited, this is through Oregon State. And by the way, I learned about this because I'm part of a Google group called AI in Education, which is a fantastic resource, and I've learned a ton from them. What they've done, the way to read this is that you've got these the cognitive skills that Bloom talks about, from remembering to creating, right? And it sort of increases in terms of level of complexity. Right next to it, they've got the words review or amend, and it is their suggestion that if you have learning objectives that, for example, are requiring students to remember information, that given the capabilities of AI, it would be important to not just review, but perhaps amend what it is that you're doing so that it takes into account what students could be able to do with generative AI. And of course, all of these, they're asking you to look at it, but they're analyze and remember. They're specifically asking you to amend your objectives and your assignments, given the fact that generative AI, ChatGPT, particular, is particularly good at remembering and analyzing. And we'll talk a little bit about ChatGPT's GPT-4's ability to analyze. I can post the link to this in the chat, and then you can look at the website. They go through each one of these in detail. So that's Bloom's taxonomy. Now with SAMR, I think there are a lot of, I think this is an incredibly valuable tool in general, and we've used this in terms of technology for a long time. Again, thanks in part to Nancy, Melanie, and Laurel bringing this to our attention. But the first one is substitution, right? So if we think about it, that would be using generative AI, which I'm calling GAI, to replace a traditional task without changing the task itself. So for example, one of the things that we do in social work is that we're always coming up with scenarios, right? Um, Imagine that you're working with a client who is a 13-year-old white male whose parent recently died from an opioid overdose. Um, Boom, 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 right? So you have these scenarios, and there's lots of things you can do with that. You can you can use this in a policy class, you can use this in a practice class, a research class, right? A human development class. There's all sorts of places where this can apply. Um, a substitution would be that you're having a conversation with students in class, they're bringing up information, and you're like, you know what, let's have you look at a scenario. Well, you as the instructor could make up a scenario, but maybe it's in a topic that you're not too familiar with. You don't want to turn this into a case review of one of your students' cases. So you pop these pieces of information into generative AI, into ChatGPT, and you say, come up with a 250 word scenario using these 3 items, right? And it'll pop up a scenario. In a paper that um, I wrote with Joanna Baez. We have an example of a scenario that I asked ChatGPT to write, which included English and Spanish. And it did a great job of coming up with dialogue in English and Spanish. So again, this is an example of substitution, right? It's a scenario, and we're simply substituting the function of ChatGPT for something that you might have pulled out of a book or that you might have come up with yourself, and it's doing that. Um, Now, augmentation. This is when you use generative AI to perform the same task, but with some functional improvements. So I might have a reading, and let's say that I know that half of my class are students that are school social work track, and the other half of my students are doing sort of community mental health, or they're involved in some sort of inpatient setting. Well, I might take the same reading about a topic, let's say it's about attachment, and I might ask generative AI to create 2 versions of this. One of them has examples of how this might apply in a school setting, and the other one might have examples of how it applies in a community setting. Again, I'm using it as a teacher's aid. I could have come up with this probably given enough time or energy, but what I'm doing is I'm using generative AI as my assistant to come up with these. Now, it's incumbent upon me to read them and to make sure that what GAI comes up, that what ChatGPT comes up with, is actually useful, right? Just like I would if I had a GA, right? Or a TA, a teaching assistant, right? I would want to review what they were coming up with before I share it in class. But this would be an example of augmentation. Now, an example of modification, and this is where you start transforming things, right? Using generative AI to significantly redesign parts of the task, right? So if what you want is, let's say the task, and this is fairly typical or traditional in social work programs, you'll have a fishbowl exercise where you get either a couple of students or a student and the instructor, or possibly a guest who's come in role playing in front of the class, right? So there's one role play, and then the students can think about it, they can talk about it. One modification is, instead of students watching a role play, you could have students chat with ChatGPT as if they're a client, right? So it's given a specific scenario, but the students are chatting as if or not as if, but they're actually engaging with the client themselves, right? So again, that's a modification. It's a different assignment, right? Um, it it's it's still something that could have done, right? You could have split people into dyads, right, and had them do role plays. But this is a way of doing it with Chat GPT. You could have the exact same demographics, the same exact case details, and they're engaging with it. Now, a redefinition, right? This is using generative AI to create new tasks that were previously inconceivable. So one example would be having students using GAI to develop a new code of ethics. In social work, we're always talking about the NASW Code of Ethics. We're critiquing it. We're teaching students how to think about it. Practitioners are obviously familiar with it because of risk management, et cetera, et cetera. But what would it mean if we had students develop a new code of ethics, right? And there's lots of things that could happen with this. They could say, oh, well, we had ChatGPT come up with a code of ethics because we gave it the following parameters, right? And so it started to think about things differently. And how does that then compare to our current code of ethics? So you could still use uh, some of the same skills around analysis, around synthesis that we're wanting folks to do. Of course, you would want to look at the modified Bloom's taxonomy to make sure that you weren't replicating what ChatGPT was already going to be able to do. But so that would be a redefinition. And again, I'm not saying that nobody ever has students come up with a new code of ethics. I'm not saying that nobody's ever done that. What I'm saying is that this could actually be an assignment where you have 25 students in your class, each one of them coming up with a code of ethics. And then you could go from there. So I think that that's some really powerful and exciting possibilities for ChatGPT. Now, one of the ways that ChatGPT can support the instructor, right, is by doing some of the tasks that are helpful, but maybe you don't want to do, right? So, for example, something I've been doing for years is I have a weekly feedback survey. It's a simple Google Doc where I have students rate how much of the reading they've done, how much of the listening they've done. Then I have it's like a 1-minute paper, right? What do you have questions about, or what did you learn? What did you learn? What do you have questions about? And then what do you want me to know? And it's anonymous. What I do every week for the first half of the semester is I look at their feedback and I write them an email. And I say, this is what you learned, this is what you have questions about, and I provide some responses to those questions. And then I say, this is what you want me to know. And if there's something that can help me course correct, I can do that. So for example, this semester, one of the students said, the sibilance, sort of the S sounds in my headset mic is really annoying. I was like, oh, what can I do about that? And so I tested it out. I let them know, right? So it was some feedback. What I've started to do this semester, and I've told my students that I'm doing this, is I've started taking the things that they learned, right? Their feedback about what they've learned, and I pop it into ChatGPT and I ask it to summarize it, identify the most commonly listed things that they've learned, and then also to give me a basic sentiment analysis, right? And what it does in a matter of 60 seconds is it summarizes really accurately the things that I would have done that would have taken me 25 minutes to do. Again, I've compared it and it's correct, right? This is exactly the kind of thing that ChatGPT is really good at. And so I'm able to provide feedback to my students much more quickly. ChatGPT is also good for drafting emails, for drafting responses. I have gotten a couple of emails from students this semester where I have found myself a little frustrated. Right? And instead of sort of popping off an email that's like, as I said in class, and as you should have read in the syllabus, and this blah blah blah, right, sort of getting snarky, I've asked ChatGPT to help me craft an email. Again, that's not necessarily saving me a lot of time because it doesn't have to be a long email, but it gives me a chance to stop and think about, okay, is this the best response possible? Now, providing feedback on student assignments. This is a little bit like analyzing the student survey, but it has a lot more ethical issues, right? So last semester, I was teaching a doctoral class, and I had a student who submitted a paper. And again, this is one of these times where I was really frustrated with the paper, in part because I'd spent a lot of time with this student to come up with the topic, and we'd found resources, and then the paper they turned in had nothing to do with anything that we talked about. And so I had a lot of feedback, but I realized that it was almost all of it was like negative, and it wasn't it wasn't in the spirit that I wanted to support the student. And so what I did was I took parts of the assignment and I asked ChatGPT to provide some constructive criticism and here's the assignment, right? And provide some constructive criticism. And what it came up with was amazing. Like, it was so thoughtful. It said, well, they did this, but given that the assignment was this, it would have been helpful had they connected it to this other piece. And I was like, oh yeah, that's right, right. So it was like a consultant. It was as if I had reached out to one of my trusted friends, another professor, and said, can you help me with this? But they don't have time for that either because it's the end of the semester and they're grading. So I went to ChatGPT as a teacher's aide, and it really it it was amazing resource. Now, one of the things on this AI and education Google group, somebody posted a link to a service that will, if you upload a rubric, students can upload their assignments to that service and it will provide them feedback. And I actually think this is a really interesting use case. Um, and by the way, I should say that the generative AI that I've been talking about is kind of global, right? There's nothing that I've been talking about that is a specific trained generative AI program, like explicitly for grading papers or explicitly for doing this, right? This is all this sort of broad model. I think that in the future, we're probably going to see very specific applications that use generative AI. And this is actually one of the ones that I think that could be most useful as a teacher's aide, which is, and again, this could be a program that a professor could have or a department could have, where you have grading rubrics uploaded to a program, and students are asked to submit a first draft of a paper to this, and then they get feedback as a way of providing insight into how to improve the paper, or if it needs to be improved before submitting a final version. Now, for social work, I think this is like incredibly helpful. I've had conversations with friends who are like undergrad poli-sci professors and things like that, whose main task is to have students grapple with ideas and to struggle with the process of writing. And in social work, I don't want my students so much to struggle with the process of writing as much as to be able to be proficient in technical writing and be able to convey information, the right information in the most parsimonious way, because that's kind of what they have to do out there in the real world. Now, the last thing is class prep. So I don't teach a lot of policy classes, but I was trying to think about, well, if I had to teach a healthcare policy class, which again is a standard social work class, um, and and one of the topics was the Affordable Care Act. How might I use ChatGPT to support me as the instructor, right? And so what I decided to do was I decided to play around with this option that is in ChatGPT 4, where you can upload documents and have a dialogue, ask ChatGPT to analyze those documents. And so what I did was I went to Congressional Record and I downloaded the 2023 version of the Affordable Care Act. It's a long document. There's a lot of kind of legalese. It's not the most interesting read, from my perspective. I also got a PDF of the 2021 NASW Code of Ethics. I uploaded both of those documents to ChatGPT. I made sure that ChatGPT could read them. It could, and then I asked it to look at the Affordable Care Act based on the ethical principles of social work ethic. There are 6 ethical principles in the NASW Code of Ethics. And so this was the first slide. I know there's a lot of words here, but so service, social justice, dignity and worth of the person, importance of human relationships, integrity and competence. ChatGPT pulled this out of the PDF from the Code of Ethics. I did not tell it that this was the principles, right? The ethical principles. So it was able to do that. That was kind of a check that I did. Is it pulling out the right stuff? And then what it did, because I'd asked it to look at it the Affordable Care Act legislation and these ethical principles. And so what it did was it says, for example, with service, the ACA aims to provide health insurance to more Americans, which may align with the principle of service by aiming to provide a vital resource, healthcare, to individuals who may otherwise go without. Okay, yeah, that works, right? I highlighted social justice because I'm going to show this a couple of slides where I go into more detail about that. But what it said was the ACA has provisions intended to make healthcare more accessible and affordable, particularly for populations that may struggle to secure healthcare coverage, which may align with the principles of social justice. This is right, right? This is correct. And again, I don't need ChatGPT to tell me this. I don't need it to tell my students this. But it was kind of a first level litmus test to say, okay, is it getting some basic ideas? I'm not going to read through the rest of this, but I want to say I asked it to look at the entire document of the Affordable Care Act, which it, by the way, it told me is like, it's a really long document. I'm not going to be able to do the whole thing for you. You should look it up yourself. But I did ask it to look at the provisions of the ACA specifically related to social justice. Now, what it did was it said, again, this is the text directly from ChatGPT 4. The Affordable Care Act has several key provisions that aim to expand access to healthcare, reduce costs, and improve healthcare quality. Here are a few key provisions that may relate to social justice. So expanding coverage, affordability, pre-existing conditions, essential health benefits, preventative services. So it pulled this stuff out. The reason why, actually, before I go into that. So these are some of the provisions. And then it said, here are the relationships between social justice and the Affordable Care Act provisions. So access for vulnerable populations, right? So this is where it's pulling in some of these social work concepts, more of these social work concepts, and expanding it slightly from the previous slide, right? So, for example, the last one, addressing disparities. The ACA aimed to reduce disparities in healthcare access and quality amongst different populations, which is a key concern in the pursuit of social justice. So, as a teacher's aide, this was really helpful. I was able to have ChatGPT provide a basic analysis of these two documents. It took me about 30 minutes to download the PDF for both of those, upload, ask the questions, and get this information, right? Now, what I would do is I would say, okay, thank you for providing me this basic thing. And then I would have gone and looked into the ACA if I were teaching and pulled out some specifics. I might have asked ChatGPT to find specific language from the ACA legislation and be able to then search for that and to have better understandings of the sections, right? There are tons of other things that I could do, but this is an example of how I was able to use ChatGPT to do some analysis where it took something that was explicitly social work and something that was explicitly not social work and to find some overlap. I did a presentation on ChatGPT and scholarship a couple of weeks ago where I uploaded data from Chicago, the city of Chicago, crime data. And I was able to have it analyze the crime data. And then I asked it to think through the crime data through the lenses of Bronfenbrenner's ecosystems model and also critical race theory. And Michael Lipsky's street level bureaucracy. And then I had it do a sort of a synthesis of all three of those ideas based on the data. It did a pretty good job, right? And so there's a lot of possibility as in terms of prep work that you can do as a professor, an instructor that understands kind of the broad swath of what's going on. And again, to use it as a teacher's aid. Now, one of the folks on the AI and education listserv, John Ippolito, if I'm pronouncing John's last name correctly, he had this really interesting survey that he did, right? Is it okay to use generative AI for instructors to, for example, summarize research on a lesson topic, to write a lesson plan, to generate a lesson glossary, to suggest alternate perspectives for an issue, or generate flashcards, or assess rote homework, right, such as quizzes, right, or to assess interpretive homework like essays and projects. So again, is it okay for instructors to do this? And this is something for you to think about, right? Do I think this is okay? And then for students, right, do we think that, is it okay for students to use, say, ChatGPT to summarize research into project topics, or organize notes into an outline, or write a draft from an outline, or revise a draft for organization or polish, or to use ChatGPT as a Socratic tutor, or to convert text into a chart, right? These are all things that ChatGPT can do. And I'm using ChatGPT generically, right? There's Bard, there's other generative AI services. But how do we feel about this? I think that this year, right, academic year 23-24, we need to be asking our colleagues about this, and we need to figure out sort of where we stand as an instructor and where our colleagues stand as as instructors and in schools, because I think that's going to help us fashion our policies, and how we're thinking through this. Now, I think that one of the other things that I heard on this A16Z podcast was that generative AI today is kind of like Kitty Hawk, right? It's kind of like the first flight, although I know that there's some controversy over who flew first. But let's just say that, the Wright brothers in North Carolina, right, the first flight, right, that we are at Kitty Hawk right now, right, and we don't actually know what's going to happen in the future. But I think it's useful to play around with these ideas. For me, I think it's exciting to imagine specific use cases where we have trained AI data sets, let's say with the complete writings of Malcolm X, and where we could have students be able to dialogue with Malcolm X using ChatGPT or a specific version of it, and asking about specific situations that are coming up today. I think that one of the things that we don't have is we don't have millions of hours of therapy sessions that are available to train data sets, ChatGPT. Now, I know that there are some companies that are doing this, but this is the kind of thing that currently generative AI is not able to do a great job of, and this sort of specific to social work and maybe psychology and counseling, but to help understand the process of therapy sessions. I also think that simulation is going to be huge. I think that right now some schools use simulation to teach things in social work. I know that medical schools and nursing have been using it for a long time, but I think that simulation, to the point where we're going to have people who have their educational process built into generative AI, so that generative AI is going to understand what they need, kind of at a modular level, and that simulation will be one of the ways, both in terms of 2D and 3D simulation, that they are going to be able to learn. And finally, there's an idea that Susanna Fox shared many years ago, again on the A16Z podcast, but she said, I think the future of big data is actually small data. It's how do we learn from ourselves? And I think that that's one of the things that is incredibly powerful for ChatGPT moving forward with students, is the increasing specialization of what is it that students need, so that they can sort of achieve the learning goals that we have for them. And one of the articles that was shared on the AI in education listserv, I think, was from a Harvard Business Review or Harvard Business professor, who said that one of the things that he found in his research was that when employees, and I think these might have been folks in sales, who use generative AI, what it did was it brought up kind of the weakest employees up to the level of performance of the best employees. And so there's a way in which using or generative AI can improve, can bring up the bottom, and there's a bottom in every profession, right? What he also found was that folks who were already expert in something that ended up relying on generative AI to take care of things that they were already really good at, that their performance decreased. And so there's a way in which we have to think about this. And I think that this is important for students, but I also think it's important for instructors. If we end up using ChatGPT to do things that we are already really good at least for right now, it's probably not going to be quite as good as if we just did it ourselves, right? But if we think about what are the things that our students could use ChatGPT for to improve their performance, I think that could be amazing, right? And that's one of the things that we have to think through. Okay, so a lot of words, little time. Now I'm going to open up for Q&A and discussion. And let me stop my share. All right. I see there's lots of chats. I have not read any of these. So any questions or comments, you can please raise your Zoom hand because there's more than one screen of people here and lots of folks are offline. Yeah, Steve.
Hey, Jonathan, I just wanted to say thanks, first of all, for this presentation. In the chat, which I know is something you haven't looked at, I really appreciate the forward-thinking nature of all of this, which I know that the people in this room already are looking to. So much media about how AI is going to destroy higher education or just sort of make it kind of end it. And maybe, there are things that will end, maybe there are things that, going back to the other measures. But this is a comment, which is, in a couple of weeks, APM is coming, and I and a colleague here in this room with me are going to present on a variation of this topic for asynchronous course material and how can we harness AI to be a part of that. And I'm just going to say, your idea about new code of ethics generation, I'm going to practice that with my students over the next couple of weeks and provide some examples of what they come up with for this presentation. And I just want to give you a credit ahead of time for that idea because I was trying to wrap my mind around what can we do to really capture this moment. So thank you. And then
that's excellent. Yeah, thanks, Steve. Yeah, and for folks who are on that are not social workers, APM is the annual program meeting of the Council on Social Work Education. Great. Other questions, or do people have comments, examples of how they have used it or how they're thinking of using it? Nancy.
Yeah, less a specific example, but just a general one. Building on all of the wonderful examples you gave, I find that after I get some content from ChatGPT, it's helpful for me to back up and ask it to provide me with 3 or 4 different critiques of what it just gave me. And then to repeat it, saying, and now, critiques of the critiques. And but asking for a few, not just for one, because what I find is it scopes out a very large universe of possibilities, which then I can sort of independently think about and pursue and think things through just as a starting place. It's the same way that I sometimes have told students to use Wikipedia. Don't use it as an ending place, use it as a starting place to give you a little bit of a map and then take off from there and see what's missing. And in fact, I might ask ChatGPT a question like that. What's missing from this analysis when you do things? I do think it's about, there was a comment from, I'm going to massacre your name, I think, Tai Kyung Park, maybe, that we need to be creative. It really traps our creativity in terms of how to interact with it. And all of your assignments, I think, really demonstrate that. And I think that's not, again, it's not how it's been sold.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nancy. All right, so are there things that folks that I can clarify from anything that I shared? I know I went quickly, in part because this is recorded, and you will be able to review the recording. But also, I wanted to make sure that we had time for conversation. So, anything that I said that you want clarification on, or that you disagree with, or that you want to modify or augment, or kind of SAMR.
Raise our hand. I can't find it.
Oh, Geronda, did you have something to share?
Yes, I did. And
Oh, okay. Hi.
I don't know why I can't find the hand raise. I use Zoom all the time, but um, I guess I need my glasses. So thank you again, as others have stated. This was an amazing presentation. I really appreciate it. And thank you for giving us some new ideas on how to use it. I was just going to respond to your question about some of the ways that I've used it
Great.
very basically. Um, but I've used it and I was just so giddy to create rubrics like within seconds, class schedules where you simply put in the dates and the chapters and some of the topics. And I actually only wanted it to create, I mean, it's a table that would have taken me a good 30 minutes or longer to do with the calendar dates and everything. And I only wanted it to give me the dates and chapters, but it actually gave me topic ideas that I wasn't even expecting. I didn't even request. So I thought that was amazing. I've also used it to help extend some discussion ideas. So some topics that I would have been covering in class, and I've asked it to give me some other ideas on some of the topics. And it's just taken it to another level, icebreakers, but icebreakers that specifically tie into the content of the course, as well as like an assignment that I was working on. And I was making some changes and some tweaks. And I thought, oh, let me just put it into here to see how it may do it. And it gave me all various other ideas on how to expand or tweak the assignment. And so it was pretty amazing. And I attended a session that they talked about the importance of the prompt and how when you give it your background to tell it, where, what kind of work you do, what are some of your research interests, and what are the courses that you teach, so that it responds to your prompts based on that. And so it's been quite fascinating. I'm always discovering new things. But I did have a question about, I think I may know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway, because you mentioned the version 4, and I know that that's a paid version. Are you able to upload any documents to the free version?
No, thank you for that question. First of all, thank you for those wonderful, very practical uses of ChatGPT. And I want to just second your statement about the use of ChatGPT for things like, um, uh, y- again, the teacher's aid stuff, right? So I used it because I wanted to change the dates for my syllabus. I asked ChatGPT to come up with the Excel spreadsheet formula for converting numbers into letter grades based on our school's criteria. I've asked it to. I had a podcast transcript that didn't include the introduction and it had timestamps. And I asked it to add 6 minutes and 13 seconds onto every timestamp so that it would be accurate. And it was, right? So these are little things that it can do that can be incredibly powerful. I use ChatGPT 4. I pay for it out of pocket. I've been doing that for several months now because I want to be able to play around with it. Um, my understanding is that with ChatGPT 3.5, the free version, you can't upload documents. You can copy and paste certain amount of text and upload that. And so you can have it do analysis of sort of a short amount of text. But in terms of the stuff that I was talking about, where you upload like the code of ethics and the complete congressional record of the ACA document, which again is hundreds and hundreds of pages, like that's through the paid version, GPT-4. Um, Also, I didn't really talk about AI images, but I also think that there's a lot of value in that. But that's a story for another time. Um, Now, Steve, I saw. Does anybody have a department that covers the cost of it? I know that at Loyola, we will. I asked our dean to look into having like a departmental account, um, not necessarily to purchase a subscription so that everybody in the School of Social Work can have one, but a departmental account to be able to do things like, we had a survey of faculty, right, and staff on certain things related to how things were going, and to be able to quickly and easily analyze that using ChatGPT could, I think, again, could be a huge time saver. Does anybody have a department that's covering the cost of ChatGPT, or has anybody figured out uh, that angle? Okay. Let's see. Other questions or comments? And if we don't, people can get back to their busy lives, and that's totally fine too. But since we're all here, happy to spend the time to talk about this. Jera?
Yes, sorry. I find it refreshing to be in a group that we can have some of these honest conversations about this. And I find it also comical that we're asking if there's any institutions that are paying for it, when I saw somebody else in the chat saying that their institution is looking at ways to block it. So I just want to say thank you for providing this information. It is always refreshing for me, with being one of the forward thinking and even developing online programs or online, coursework. Now we're at a whole nother pivotal moment. So thank you for doing these. It does help those that seem a little bit more isolated in departments. So thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome. There are 2 more webinars that are coming up through the grand challenges. There's one on social work practice, and then let's see, I think that's in April. There's another one. What is it on? I can't remember. Joanna, do you remember what it's on? I don't have it with me, but anyway, so we're doing a couple more. Obviously, there are bajillions of these that are happening. Steve.
Yeah, just to point out that the person that noted that the university is not allowed, he's looking for ways to block people, and also the person wondering about if anybody's getting departmental funding for it. Those are both me, because I think that this is a pivotal moment for us at this stage to talk about what is helpful and useful about this. Essentially, this is a tool. And I just put it out there because there was a flurry of content, which I understand my institution's point of view on this, which is how can you manage your current existence in your course designs when it comes down to people generating answers and submitting them and so forth. And I look forward to 1 year from now on what things will look like, because I think there'll be some adaptations and perspective on how things will look different. So anyway, just wanted to point that out, that it's a cornucopia of challenges.
All right, thanks, Steve. Hillary.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you had any instructions that you give your students in using it for their assignments. Like, you are welcome to use it for this assignment. However, I would love your analysis of how well chat generated your assignment. Or what kind of instruction to encourage critical thinking at the same time.
Yeah, so I have not given my students instructions for using it this semester. What I've been doing with my students this semester is I've just been having conversations every week about ChatGPT, and so I'm teaching second year MSW students. I've got a class called Social Work with Adolescents, and I'm also teaching assessment and diagnosis for first year MSW students, and I surveyed them at the beginning of the semester, and most of the students who'd come in, they had never used it. They didn't know what it was. It was a little terrifying. Most of them were like, students should never be able to use ChatGPT. I mean, that was the answer they gave. The second year students were like, no, I think in certain situations it would be fine. So natively, they're probably not using it. And also the assignments have not lended themselves to ChatGPT. So for example, with the assessment and diagnosis, the first assignment was, what is your understanding of assessment in the context of social work? Apply it to your internship if you're in one. And so it would take way more time and energy to use ChatGPT for that than to actually just do the assignment. So but I love the idea of having students think critically about the content that generative AI is coming up with. I've given them examples where I have had ChatGPT create PowerPoint slides for me based on like a podcast transcript. And then I asked them, I didn't tell them in advance this was uh, 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 the ChatGPT, but I was like, so, give me some feedback on this. And people were like, it's okay. And I was like, it's ChatGPT. They're like, yeah, that kind of makes sense. It's like it was good enough, but it wasn't great. Um, but I think that those instructions are important. We had Joanna and Sabrina gave a webinar last couple weeks ago on this idea of classroom policies, and so they had some more information about that. Nancy.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that Melanie Sage has been sharing that she's been teaching a research methods course, and she's actually worked ChatGPT into the students' assignments, where they're actually asking ChatGPT to help them to refine their research questions, and then discussing that, and then sharing that collectively and individually with each other. In other words, they critique it and in small groups, and individually they develop it further. They're critiquing ChatGPT's answer. They're also developing on it further. And it's all a show your work sort of thing. So they have to show what the printouts are as well as what their contribution is, which frankly is just way too much work if you were going to try to fabricate it, right? So I think that's
Yeah.
part of it. But I also feel like the students said they had much sharper understanding of their research questions as a result of doing this. And so I do think that that's really the key. And obviously, it's really not a lot with a syllabus. Partly you have to say you need to disclose when you're using it and show how you're using it. Sort of transparency is sort of value that we all try to support. But I do think our university's been very focused on sharing those statements too. On the other hand, they're asking us to consider ways we can use AI to advance education. So, we're getting a slightly different messages from different parts of the university.
Yeah, it is an interesting thing when the message is how can we shut down student use and how can we increase instructor use? Any final questions or comments? And by the way, it's so again for the folks of you that I know, it's so great to see you on here. Thank you for taking the time to come out and hang, Diana. Hi, and for those of you that I don't know, appreciate you signing up for this, and I hope that it was helpful. Joanna posted the information about the next two webinars in the chat. The recording for this will be available, as will the slides. I suspect that I will get the transcript from this and I will turn it into a Twitter thread, so that just because it's super fun. All right. Have a great rest of your day, y'all. And we'll see you next time.